Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we are looking at this, the RS422 Plus from Synology. We are going to be performing a bunch of Plex media server tests, and anyone that's ever watched this channel before, you know exactly how this is going to go down. But if you are new to this is off your first Synology NAS and you're new to the channel, don't worry, I will explain things all the way through, what we're testing, why we're testing, and why it is significant all the way through the video. But without further ado, let's crack on. So this NAS takes advantage of this CPU here, an AMD Ryzen R1600. It's an embedded Ryzen processor, and again it's a dual core CPU, and the system arrives with 2 GB of memory that can't be upgraded. Now I will mention very early doors before we get our teeth into the testing that 2 GB of memory is sort of the minimum I would recommend for a Plex media server NAS anyway. And although normally when I do these tests, the thing that I'm looking the most at is on the right hand side of the screen here in terms of CPU utilization, something I'll touch on later on. For this video, I am going to be keeping an eye on the RAM as well, because if you utilize a NAS like this for Plex, you're not going to be leaving a lot of resources for anything else. And I think although this is a very compact, very easygoing server with some great software from Synology there, I think the lack of memory above 2 GB, given that DSM 7.1 in of itself, as you can see there, is already utilizing 50% of the memory available, I think this is going to be interesting to see if this 2 GB is going to be up to task. Now, in today's video, we're going to be doing the following. We're going to be logging into Plex Media Server, and as you can see from the top of the screen, we are logging in locally. That is to say that we are accessing this NAS via the local area network. We're not accessing it remotely over the internet. But don't worry, while I'm doing it, I am going to be simulating a limited connection environment. So I'm going to be taking advantage of something called transcoding. Now, transcoding is when a file is reshaped on the fly to be better suited to the network environment or the intended client device, like a phone, a tablet, a TV, or whatever, than the original quality. And as I go through the video, I will be reshaping some of these files and explaining the reason behind them, so do stay tuned for that. But just because we're accessing it locally doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to run perfectly anyway, and also that we're not going to be trying to attack the subject of remote connection as well. Now, during this, we're going to be testing a few files. We're going to be testing a bunch of media files that I've tested before. I tend to stick with the same files. We're going to be looking at some movies. We're going to be looking at a couple of movies, one in 720, one in 1080, and then we're going to move on to the Jellyfish files, something I'll touch on later on. But these are quite a significant body of files here that get bigger and bigger and bigger, even though they're the same 30-second file. So, we know our hardware spec, we know the NAS. What about Plex? Well, we're using a Plex Pass account here. As you can see, I have a lot of different NASes all lined up here on the left. I'm running quite a lot of tests today, not just with Plex, but with other things. So I apologize in advance if you can hear any of these NASes in my network environment. Right now, there are 7 NASes in this room, running different tests for different videos and articles on NAS Compares. So I apologize if there is a bit of feedback there in the background, a bit of a hiss of some of that equipment there during the course of the recording. But if we go to the bottom there, we can see the RS422 there. We can click Films, and as you can see, we are accessing, ignore that, we're accessing films in the RS422 category. On the right hand side of the screen, you can go down and you can see we have enabled transcoding. This is for the Plex media server, the Plex server software, to be able to use the full hardware resources that are available from that CPU. And it says if hardware resources are, hardware acceleration resources are available, that Plex can use them. However, it's worth highlighting that the CPU in this NAS does not have embedded graphics. It does not have hardware transcoding available. So we are going to be using raw CPU power, something you're going to see later on will have its impact. So we'll leave these specs up there on screen. We're going to make sure we mute, because otherwise this YouTube will not allow me to monetize. And the first file we're going to go with is the matrix there. It's a 720p file, H.264, something that will become significant later that I will touch on. But for now, let's play it. And again, if we open up the bottom of the screen, we'll be able to see we are running, as you can see, the original file at 720p. It's also worth highlighting that I am using OBS to record this, as you can see here on screen, and because of that, there may be the odd drop in the recording pattern there. Don't worry, that's going to be OBS, not the file we're watching. And again, we can skip forward, nice and easy. We're accessing over the network, no problems whatsoever. Skippity, all great. We could ignore the bandwidth, cycle down, because what we want to see is the CPU and that memory. So the first thing we're going to do is do a little bit of transcoding. Now, again, with transcoding, this is when a file is going to be reshaped. Again, I know I'm explaining things very, very long, and I apologize, but I've got to make sure that people that are new to this are up to speed. So I apologize if you've heard this before. But with the converting and the transcoding that we're performing, this would be to convert this file into something into 480p. Again, no one's going to do this on a local area network over DLNA. People are going to do this if they're accessing it on their mobile phone in a hotel room on the other side of the world, or when they're commuting. So we'll go down to 480. That was an instantaneous change. As you can see, it's still working absolutely fine there. Hardly a blip on the CPU, hardly a blip there on the memory. But when we go down to these lower ones here, this is when things get tough. So 240p there, we'll let that go forward. And as we can see, we're already getting a bit pixelated there. The CPU has already started to spike. And again, we expected that. That's fine. And if we transcode along, sorry, not transcode, we move along the area there to allow it to transcode, we can see that it's still doing a pretty snappy job there in order to transcode this file. So we're not going to go any lower than that because we'll save that for the next test file. But if we come out of the matrix now, we can go into our next test file there, which is going to be Little Shop of Horrors. This is a 1080p file, H.264. Again, we will explain the significance of that in a little bit. But for now, we can go ahead and play. While it does that playing, you can see there on the right-hand side of the screen that CPU utilization that Plex was pushing at 91%. We were transcoding, bear in mind, so during native playback it was fine, but still, get used to seeing this when we do anything even slightly graphically aggressive. So again, skip forward, we can skip around, the system's running fine, we're good, excellent. So from there, we'll bring that up on there, we're going to transcode again. So this time, we're going to transcode down, again, straight down to 480p immediately there. So again, this is a few rungs down the ladder from what was there. We're going to start to see that CPU spike there. And you can see we're already starting to run. CPU is now fast achieving, yep, we're at 99.05%, which is not great. But let's face it, it was expected for a CPU like this. But the memory is still holding out pretty well there. Nothing too aggressive is happening there. So again, our suspicions about this CPU not having embedded graphics and not having a transcoding engine on board are going to play their part when it comes to transcoding. Native playback still seems to be fine though. And now if we go to the lowest, the 160p quality, otherwise what I refer to as potato quality. Let's go for that there, zoom down, let it transcode out. And it should be able to do it, but it will take its sweet, sweet time to do it. So we need to let it finish up there. Again, do take note of the little dark orange bar there. That darker orange is the encode. That is basically how much of the file the system has prepped in order for playback. You've seen it with YouTube with buffering there at the bottom. But even for now, this is really struggling to knock this file down to 160p. And that downward spike there is not a good sign there. That means that the system is hanging and it's largely abandoned the process. It may take another run up, but it looks like for me, like what we're going to see here is it's going to fail at this transcode here for this file. Again, this is a transcode. This is not native playback. So there's not a huge amount to be concerned with at all. But for now, I think we're going to have to kill that there. It did not pass that barrier. So those are kind of average files that you might test out. But if we go back into the files there and we go back into the RS422, so we go there, go to the main library, and this time we want to go for the 1080p and 4K Jellyfish files. Now, I've mentioned before about these. Why are they so significant? Now, the Jellyfish files are a collection of files that are all the same 30-second bit of footage of some jellyfish knocking around in the water. I've already mentioned it. But all of these files increase in picture quality, they increase in resolution, they increase in bitrate, they increase in compression technique. The result is that what a file starts at 3 megabits at 1080p at H.264 ends at 400 megabits per second 4K UHD or Ultra HD highly efficient video codec, otherwise known as H.265, and 10-bit HDR. And again, when we look at those file sizes, we can look at the first file that we just mentioned there, knocks around for about 10 megabytes. The final file is 1.4 gigabytes. That's 1400 megabytes there compared with 10. That's a lot of work for a CPU to be doing there. Now, as we go through them, we're going to be testing the H.264 files first. The reason being, the H.264 should be the most straightforward to run. We're not going to do much transcoding here. You'll see why in just a moment. But with H.264, it is a compression technique that allows large, movie, cinema-esque style file formats to be compressed to be watched on your TV at home. Now, these compression techniques do differ. There's H.264 and H.265, otherwise known as HEVC, highly efficient video codec. Now, H.264 is pretty much worldly available. Everyone can use it. I don't think there's any licensing difficulties with it, and therefore it always plays on everything. HEVC is slightly different. It's a shared patent when it was created, and it's actually a lot more work and money to have a license for a lot of companies to have an HEVC codec playback support. The result is that most systems, not just NASes, I'm talking some of the big guns out there, your Apples and your Googles, will not play these files natively. That's why when you tried to use Windows Media Player in the past and it couldn't play some files, but VLC played it straight out of the bat, this is one of those reasons. So when we go through the H.264s, these should all play quite easily, but when we play the HEVC files, the system's going to have to work pretty bloody hard. Case in point, if we zoom out and we play the first Jellyfish file there, we open up at the bottom, boom, play straight away. We knew that was going to happen. There was never going to be difficulty. And as you can see, the light orange there of playback has not outpaced the dark orange of buffering. And again, the minute the light orange outpaces the dark orange, the simple answer there is it is playing faster than the system can encode it, and therefore it fails. As you can see, it's playing all the way through. Same goes when we go to a 10-bit file. Oh no, that's the wrong file, I apologise. We want to go for a 10 megabits per second H.264. Ignore that spike, that was me selecting the wrong file there. But again, straight away, instant playback there. Lovely stuff, dark orange, buffered all the way to the end. Things are absolutely fine there. Move further down, now we're going to go for a 30 megabits per second file. Go for that one there. We're going to start to feel a little bit of system work here. But again, the dark orange is still massively outpacing the light. The playback is not outpacing the buffering. And then we're starting to see little bumps start to appear on that H.264 file format there. Now we're going to go for the 100 megabits per second H.264 file there. We're going to go ahead, play that file. A little bit of a delay this time. We'll open up the bar at the bottom. And again, although the dark orange is still taking slightly longer this time, it should still outpace that playback there. Not by much, and I feel like we're about to hit the glass ceiling on this, but it is still outpacing the playback and the, organic 1, 2, 3, 4 count of this 30-second file. We're starting to see more bumps too. Now we go into the 4K area. Now this is where I think this CPU is going to hit a brick wall. There's a combination of things here, but for now, let's go ahead and click playback this file. This is our 4K Ultra HD file there. Open it up at the bottom. Again, when we see that dark orange line stop around this area, that is where we may hit difficulties, because this is when the system does not have enough resources or appropriate resources to be able to both play back the file and lay down the track, so to speak, for it to go. And as you can see, we're not seeing a spike. We saw an early spike, but that's about your lot. The bandwidth is still spiking there, so data is still being exchanged, but that's really it. And as you can see, it kicked us out of the file. It was not able to play that. And just for argument's sake, we're just going to play the last file. It's a 200 megabits per second 4K UHD file. And we'll play that one there. Open it up at the bottom. And we're probably going to see similar, if not identical, or potentially even worse results. But for now, I think right now, even based on what we're seeing here, I would not recommend this NAS for 4K multimedia right now. Now, I will highlight that these are dense files. When I say it's not appropriate for 4K, not all 4K, because I would say right now that these files here are not kind of indicative of more modern media. These are very high-end files. These are exceptionally high-end files, in fact. But for now, I think we're not seeing much going on. The CPU is trying, but we're guttering back down to 0. And although the file is there, it's really just not able to get the job done there. And I think for now, we may have to give up the ghost on the playback of this file. So those are our H.264 files. What about these ones, the highly efficient video codec ones and the 10-bit HDR? Well, this is what happens when you play these files. Just a quick reminder, this was the previous file. So this was the H.264, and you can see original there, okay? Because it can play it in the original format. However, when we play the HEVC file, go back there, sorry, clicking the wrong thing, my mouse the wrong side. If we click the HEVC file, this happens. We bring it to the bottom, and firstly, you can see that it says convert. It's automatically converting the file because it doesn't have the license there to play the file in its original format. And the dark orange there is not exactly flying off the page. It will probably still outpace playback, but look at that CPU utilization up there. That is absolutely huge there at the top right of the screen at 99% being consumed. So although it will play it, I question how long it would play back that file. So we let the dark orange finish, come out of there. Next, we're going to try the next tier up. We're not going to go with the HDR version there because you're not going to see the visual difference there. But the HEVC, we're going to go for the 10 megabit file there. And I'll be very impressed if this can make it up to the 100 megabits per second limit there. But for now, it's just, it can do the job as it stands at these 1080 files. This CPU does have 1080p graphical support, just not embedded graphics. But given that it has to transcode because of those H.265 files, it's just, even if it outpaces it, if you were watching a longer movie, this would struggle a little bit. Again, do bear in mind about the bit rate of the films. Bear in mind that the Little Shop of Horrors and Matrix films we watched earlier on were 1.5 and 3 megabits per second, but more modern media does kind of push the envelope just a little bit there. So now we'll go to the 30 megabits per second file. Go for that one there. See what happens with this CPU. The dark orange is now absolutely crying down there. We're starting to see more work happening there with that memory as well. So as you can see, with the system already utilizing 50%, when we're watching some of these files, CPU utilization is already at a total of, you know, around 70% all in, which is a concern. And in the background, you may have heard the NAS's fans have just kicked in because it knows how hard it's having to work right now. And again, it's doing the job. I would by no means call what we're watching a success there. Indeed, if I'm silent for just a moment and bring the mic over, I'm going to bring the mic a little bit closer to the fans on this NAS. Again, we're still a good meter and a half away from the NAS, so I'm not 100% certain how much of that you heard. But again, not a great look. Now we go for the 100 megabits per second file there. And again, I'll be staggered if it does the job. But right now, what I'm seeing is a NAS really trying here, but it's just not, that CPU is not built for this kind of media. If you're watching domestic media and like general quality, you should be fine. But looking at this, when we're going for the higher density stuff, this rack mount is going to hit something of a wall when it has to do those conversions. If your library is mostly H.264, you're going to be fine. But if your library has got H.265, you're going to be hitting some walls there. And again, we're starting to see playback is going to overwrite the dark orange there. The system's just not going to be able to outpace it, and it freezes like so. So again, we're going to try the 4K files, even if it is wildly unnecessary there. So now we're going to go to an H.265, and this is going to be the 4K 120. Again, I'm not 100% certain we're going to see anything of note here. Forgive the accidental right clicks there. My laptop is slightly off center, so my brain, where it thinks it's clicking left because the laptop's moved, it's actually clicking right. First world problems, I know, right? But again, we're in the trouble zone here, that trouble block. When it stops here, that normally means that the system is just not have the resources to divide and conquer. And look there at the utilization of memory, total system utilization, that's combined Plex as well, is at 92%, and it's kicked us out of the file. For the hell of it, let's try our last file. This is the monster file. Again, this monster file's only been played by like 3 NASes, I think. I think in the last 2 years I've maybe got some Intel Core i5 and maybe the W-based Xeon graphic enabled processor to play it. But for now, let's open it up there, bring that up at the bottom. But for now, let it do its conversion, and I can't see much happening here. We can zoom out. We can see CPU and memory utilization is absolutely bricking it. We can see that the dark orange is in the trouble zone, and I think for now, that's kind of where we are with that high density 4K media there. Again, it's all about being relative. A lot of the files that we're talking about here, again, are tremendously high end. These are not, just to put it into perspective there, if you look at that most dense file there at 1.4 gigabytes, that's 1.4 gigabytes for 30 seconds. That means every 1 minute is 2.8 gigabytes. That means that for a 100-minute movie, that is going to be outlandish. You see? So, again, these are not your typical files. To put it into perspective, if you were to download a copy of the Avengers in 1080p, it would be smaller than this file, of this 30-second file. So again, although these are incredibly dense, bear in mind that a lot of this is about 4K as well. As you can see, because we went off screen, we were able to let the system pause and build up towards that file. Do not assume that what we've just watched here is the file being played and the system doing it. What happened was that as soon as we left this screen, so if we click play, as soon as you leave the screen, that file pauses. It gave the system time to divert those resources to buffering. So as you can see, it was able to do it. It pauses files when you look away. But nonetheless, this has been Plex Media Server testing of the new Synology RS422 Plus. A great little NAS, a good NAS for file transmissions, a great NAS for backups and surveillance. But I would say when it comes to multimedia, as I've been saying very early on during my reviews of this NAS, I'm not sure multimedia-wise this NAS is going to tick the boxes for you. Thank you so much for watching. There are links to the review and other stuff on this NAS linked in the description, as well as a whole bevy of tests. I think this might be my 50th NAS I've tested with Plex. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. I know I was somewhere in the ballpark of the 40s or 50s, but I'll let you know. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe to learn more. Find out how to support the channel if you want to help me to make more content like this for everyone. Links in the description, and a link towards the completely free advice service over on NAS Compares linked in the description. I will see you next time.